Welcome back, comrades. It's Maximus. Thank you so much for joining me today. So one thing that has always fascinated me since I was very young was the risk or threat of the Cold War ever actually going hot and what could or should or would have happened. Scary, bloody stuff, let's be honest here, folks. If it ever did come to it, we saw that huge armoured / infantry / well, everything rush coming towards us from the east. It would have been an absolute gong show / nightmare. And I was always curious. I did a little bit of training in the British Army for, large-scale armoured warfare, but nothing compared to what, my previous generations of those who served in the British Army used to learn and were taught about, to dealing with this potential oncoming threat. And I thought I'd start doing a little bit of research, and in doing so, I found some footage via VHS, which I apologise for the quality, about how the British Army dealt with Soviet motorised brigades and armoured brigades and tank divisions and tank battalions. And honestly, it's a little scary, but also extremely interesting. So I thought I'd share it with you guys. Let's have a look at it, shall we?
Soviet troops in Afghanistan are reported to be spreading out across the country and engaging the Muslim rebels. The reports from Western diplomats suggest the Soviet formations are moving in considerable strength. 10,000 men, backed by heavy armour and aircraft, are said to be engaging the rebels.
Eyewitnesses said they counted between 300 and 400 tanks, as well as columns of artillery and troops. Although most of the troops seemed to be stationed at key areas around Kabul to establish a defensive perimeter in case of counterattacks from Afghan troops, there was just a faint sign of Christmas cheer among the soldiers at the airport.
Recent events in Afghanistan have made us all aware of the ever-increasing possibility of a limited war in Europe. The Soviets believe they have the ability to take a chunk out of Western Germany. Perhaps, for them, it is only a question of opportunity. Facing one British Corps in BAOR is 3 Shock Army.
Now, for those of you who don't know what BAOR is, it is British Army of the Rhine, which is basically the armed forces that were stationed in Germany for quite some time, that were there as the first initial, defensive force to prevent the shock armies, tank armies, and guards armies punching through the main defensive line of the Cold War era. Honestly, guys, this is scary stuff. When I was based in Germany pretty much most of my army career, I used to hear stories of, this is where we dug in, this was the road on which, if anything further crossed it, it would be a declaration of war, blah, 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 blah. It was some really scary stuff. And when you hear the first account stories of people in these, specific armies that are set across this borderline, it's just baffling to me that it ever even came to be so close to happening. The one thing that really interested me, being that I loved my armour, is the fact that these British Army of the Rhine armies or corps were pretty much fully focused on the fact that they knew they were going to be overrun. They knew that they would not hold the line. Their key objective was to shoot and manoeuvre backwards, take as many vehicles out as they could, and pull back again. Some call this a tactical retreat if you've got some pride in your army. I'd call it reality. The truth of the matter was that they knew that they weren't going to be able to hold the line, and they would have to do a retreat backwards and hold off as long as they could until eventually it would go to a strategical, standpoint where nuclear weapons or strategic weapons may have had to be used.
On its northern flank is 2 Guards Army, and on its southern flank is 8 Tank Army. 3 Shock Army sits astride the Hanover Autobahn. Although predominantly a tank-heavy army, its leading formations are motor rifle regiments.
Once again, this video relates to me quite well. If you noticed, he said to the east of the Hanover Autobahn. I was based in Fallingbostel, Germany, which was the major armoured garrison for 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rats for the most part. And, that was basically our area of operation for where I was deployed. Of course, not against the Cold War, but for those who were stationed there before me, that was their place to call home for potential World War III and the Cold War to go hot. And, you look in the environment that they had around them in Germany to train in and to prepare and to dig in. And when I say they dug in, they really dug in, because some of the dugouts, trenches, firing positions are still there to this day. Even the concrete tank traps, they're all there. Nothing's moved. And it's just a stark realization to hope that none of this ever has to happen ever again.
The Motor Rifle Regiment is split into three main elements: combat support, service support, and the fighting units. Service support includes transport, medical and maintenance companies, the supply platoon and the regimental band, totaling 160 men and 73 B vehicles. Combat support includes the signals, recce and engineer companies, the chemical defence platoon and the regimental artillery. The recce company is 50 strong and mounted in 11 BRDM APCs. The engineer company is equipped with 4 TMMs, which can each bridge a 40-metre gap. Also, it has 2 MTU-20s, capable of bridging a 20-metre gap. The regimental artillery consists of 3 batteries. The anti-tank guided weapons battery comprises 9 BRDM Saga vehicles, each with 6 missiles loaded and 8 ready for reload. This is the same basic vehicle as the recce BRDM, but the turret has been replaced by the Saga launch mechanism. In any role, the vehicle is amphibious, using its hydrojets. It has an anti-armor capability to 3,000 meters. Other versions can carry swatter missiles.
One misconception that most Western people think of the Cold War and the initial armoured assault would be that it would just be tanks and APCs and hundreds of infantry rushing towards the western side. And of course this just wasn't true. The Russians weren't stupid. This isn't the Second World War where, T-34s and infantry are holding onto the side of vehicles rushing towards, German Tigers and Panthers. It's just not the case. The Russians did have a very strong standoff capability when it came to anti-tank missile systems, of course helos, all that good stuff, where they tried their best to engage targets from long distance before pushing on that armoured advance. And as you can see by this frickin' vehicle here that's loading up 6 anti-tank missiles, you have a very strong capability at 3,000 meters to engage most armoured fighting vehicles of that time period. And you've got to remember that most of these vehicles, although quite small and, not very armoured, they're extremely quick, very manoeuvrable, able to cross rivers, which is obviously a very big natural obstacle on the battlefield anywhere in Europe. And these things could do some serious damage to any of the BOR forces or any of the defending NATO forces at the time. And of course, the most scary thing of this is these vehicles could pull into a recce position, find targets, and before they pull out of that area, take out 6 tanks potentially, before the main force even arrives. That in itself should have took a real wake-up call for most Allied commanders at the time, saying, what do we do to knock out these things? And of course, we went our own side with our own anti-tank guided missiles, our own standoff capabilities, especially when it came to, the Apache helicopter and such, to try and prevent these things from actually ever getting a missile downrange.
The 122mm battery is equipped with 6 122mm self-propelled guns, called the M1974. The gun fires HE, heat, smoke and illume to a range of 15,300 meters. Its rate of fire is 7 to 8 rounds per minute. The anti-aircraft battery is in the process of being re-equipped with 8 ZSU-23-4s. This 4-barrel radar-controlled anti-aircraft gun has a range of 2,500 meters and a cyclic rate of fire of 4,000 rounds per minute. In battle, they'll be separated up to 200 meters and they can be used in the ground roll attack. Now we look at the third and most important element of the Motor Rifle Regiment, the fighting units. These are made up of 3 motor rifle battalions of either tracked BMP or wheeled BTR-60 PB. one tank battalion of T-64. It's important at this point to understand the role of the T-72. The T-72 is the cheaper version of the T-64, which was first seen in 1976. 3 Shock Army and its flanking formations are all equipped with T-64 in both motor rifle and tank regiments. Let's have a look at the motor rifle regiment vehicles in more detail. The T-64 shown here is the main battle tank. There are 41 of these in the tank battalion, and each motor rifle battalion gets a tank company of 13 T-64s. This gives each motor rifle company a troop of 4 tanks. There is a crew of 3 men, and it's a little lighter than Chieftain, weighing only 40 tons. It's a low silhouette vehicle, the deck being about chest height. The main armament is a 125mm smoothbore gun, and it fires APDS out to 2,000 meters. It can also fire heat and HESH to about 1,500 meters. It's capable of a top speed of 65 kilometers per hour. It has 2 distinct advantages over previous Soviet tanks in that it's fitted with a laser rangefinder and has an automatic load. It's not an amphibious vehicle but can snorkel to a depth of 5 meters. Here's the BTR-60PB. This is a big, heavy APC and weighs 10 tons. It has a good cross-country performance despite its bulk. It has a crew of 2 and carries 9 passengers. Its armament is a 14.5 heavy machine gun and a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun. It was designed as an amphibian, and it has a remarkable speed of 10 kilometers per hour in water. It has 2 big disadvantages, however. The passengers can only dismount through the roof, and its great size makes it an easy target. Notice how the squad, on dismounting, moves to the front of the vehicle and advances firing in a straight line. This is normal dismounted Soviet tactics. The squad is followed closely by the APC, which can give a heavy weight of overhead fire support.
Now, the ironic thing here is, guys, Soviet tactics are very different to Western tactics when it comes to infantry dismount and mechanized assaults. These infantry soldiers are patrolling ahead of this BTR, with the BTR firing overhead. For the most part, Western tactics were very different. We tended to do, and still to this day do, the battle bus procedure, which basically means drop the troops off as quickly as possible, deploy them into a staggered or line formation beside the vehicle, and allow the vehicle to then retreat back under heavy fire, not firing over the heads of your troops, and then literally bugging out to a new location to either support from distance, provide overwatch, and even potentially pick up casualties. The Russians were not in really that same kind of doctrine. They tried their best to support their troops all the way up until the trenches or the firing lines they were going towards. Risky, I must admit, for sure. If infantry are going against infantry, you want, for the most part, for that to be the same case. But if your BTRs and your APCs, like the BMPs and such, are rolling up close in with the enemy infantry, you're risking putting them up against anti-tank fire. A prime example, the Warrior infantry section, when dropped off, the Warrior would pull up, open the rear doors, troops would pull out to the left and right, Warrior would be engaging targets as it can as they do so, it would then close door, reverse out of there as quickly as possible under smoke screen or fire, and then pull into an overwatch position to watch their troops advance. Once the troops have taken on the position or in-depth positions, the Warrior would then be radioed to pull back into their group with the reorg of the platoon/section and pick up the boys and move on to the next objective. Russian doctrine was very different, and although risky, could have potentially been quite effective if they had hundreds of these kinds of formations moving forward, as once again, the Western formations would never be able to stop that kind of advance.
This is the BMP. It's the newest Soviet APC. Its armour comprises a 73mm smoothbore gun that has 40 rounds mixed HE and HESH, maximum range of 1,300 metres, but effectiveness falls off sharply at 800 metres, a coaxial 7.62 gun, and a Saga anti-tank guided missile. The vehicle carries 4 Saga missiles. The maximum range is 3,000 metres, but it has a dead space of 0 to 500 metres because it takes the gunner 4 to 5 seconds to bring the missile under control. However, the 73mm gun compensates for this deficiency. Because the Saga gunner must track the missile to the target, smoke will defeat the weapon. On the other hand, the gunner is protected. The BMP has only light armour, and a 7.62mm high-velocity round hitting its side at 90 degrees will penetrate it. The 73mm gun is not stabilised, and the Saga must be tracked so that the vehicle has to be stationary when firing both these weapons. The BMP has no night sight for either weapon. It's especially vulnerable from behind because its rear doors are in fact flexible fuel tanks. The troops inside have the added discomfort of sitting on top of the ammunition storage space. Its strengths are its firepower, mobility, and its low silhouette. Now we'll come on to tactics. The formation of the motor rifle advance begins with recce patrols. Some 10 kilometres behind the recce patrols will be found the leading battalion group, on either side of which is the March Security Detachment. 20 kilometres behind this group will come the main body of the motor rifle regiment, and behind them the rear guard. The lead battalion group advances with a motor rifle platoon as its recce patrol. This is followed some 5 kilometres behind by the point, which is a motor rifle platoon and a tank. The next comes the vanguard, comprising a motor rifle company, less 1 platoon, a tank platoon, less 1 tank, and the anti-tank platoon. Behind this will be the main body, with all the combat, service support and artillery weapons. Behind them will be the rear guard. The vanguard company will have the first contact. They will apply the standard Soviet drill and deploy into platoon columns behind a tank. The company will then adopt standard battle formation and attack. Note the company commander is in the rear centre. The company will attack from as much as 1 kilometre away. Little use is made of cover or fire and manoeuvre, and infantry will not dismount until made to do so by the strength of the defence or the nature of the terrain. This will cause the tanks and the advance to slow down. In both types of assault, mounted or dismounted, the final 250 metres will be made with all weapons firing. The company frontage will be anything from 250 to 500 metres depending on the terrain and the enemy's strength. If the vanguard attack fails, they will remain in position to cover the leading battalion attack, which would normally develop within about 1 hour. If this fails, the regimental attack will differ in that it will be on a wider front. There will be a reserve echelon, and it will be supported by air and ground recce to locate targets such as headquarters and gunner batteries. Elaborate deception plans will be employed. It will be preceded by a formal artillery barrage lasting up to 40 minutes. The basic drill of deploying from the line of march into battle formations will be unlikely to change. We ourselves must be able to withstand the enemy's devastating artillery barrage. This can only be done by proper overhead protection in our defensive positions. The Soviet tactic of a fast, massed armoured thrust on a comparatively small front enables us to use our anti-tank weapons to devastating effect. It will not be so much a question of great accuracy as one of weight of firepower. If we can make the enemy infantry dismount, this will slow the advance, giving our machine guns and anti-tank weapons the best opportunity to halt the attack. Once dismounted, the infantry also has no means of communicating, and this makes its command and control almost impossible. Remember, the company commander is the only person with 2 radio nets in his vehicle. If all the OC's vehicles were killed, all vehicles would have to go onto the same battalion net. Remember also, the company commander is the one vehicle with 2 antennas. Here we're watching a UK battle group making the best use of its artillery and anti-tank fire. The infantry has been made to dismount and is coming under heavy small arms fire.
3 FPF fire over.
Golf 2-2, we'll go.
Fire mission battery.
Hello 2, this is 2-2, fire mission battery over. Switch up.
FPF fire.
FPF, fire over. Switch up. Shot out.
In conclusion, an intelligent assessment of the Soviet Army's weaknesses and a ruthless exploitation of them can more than compensate for NATO's comparative strength deficiency.
So folks, I hope you learned a little bit about how motorized, mechanized and armored guard companies or divisions moved towards our Western boys and girls back in the day. Like I've mentioned before, thank God it never happened, because it would have just gone to epic proportions when it comes to casualties, death rates, losses, vehicle destruction. It would just be a catastrophe. And you know, it's enough to know that nowadays we've seen the history of this thing kind of never really happening and hoping it never would, and hopefully it will follow suit for the rest of time, but we will see. Guys, if you want to support my channel, please feel free to go check out my Patreon account. Military content and YouTube tend to not get along very well. And thank you so much for watching today. If you want to follow me on my Facebook, feel free to, and come have a chat with me on my Discord. Link is in the description box below. All the best, and bye bye.